Good morning and welcome to the next in SASB series of webinars on the standards in our 6 economic sectors. Today we're going to be talking about the renewable resources and alternative energy sector with Henrik Cotran, sector analyst for the sector. I'm Michael Kinslick, head of the standards setting organization. We're going to spend a brief time going over SASB's approach to standard setting. Then I'll hand it over to Henrik to discuss the renewable sector, the upcoming proposed changes to the standards in that sector. We'll review a little bit of the next steps in the standards development process and leave some time for Q&A at the end. And so I'd also like to remind you to get your questions in at any time. So SASB takes the approach to standard setting that is based in the U.S. Supreme Court definition of materiality for U.S. investors. And that definition, as you see before you, says that a fact is material if the exclusion of that fact would alter the view of an investor in the context of the total mix of information that reasonable investor would have. This definition is rooted in case law in the United States and is well recognized as the standard for understanding whether a company is properly disclosing information to their investors. Our standard setting process starts with core pillars that we want to be evidence-based. We want to ensure that we are looking out for information that is out there in the world. Industry-specific, we take an approach that each industry is unique and has challenges in sustainability unique to it. And market informed. We want to ensure that what we're doing is by the market and for the market, as we like to say. On the left there, you'll see that we look at topics as potential topics and evaluate them for their materiality. So is it something that has the potential to affect value creation or existing valuation of an organization? Are investors interested in it? Is it something that they are likely to use as part of their investment decision-making process? Is it something that's relevant across an entire industry, not just specific to a single company? And is it something that companies can actually do to manage? Can they take action on it? When we look at all of that, we do it in the context of both of a wide range of stakeholders, although again, for the materiality determination is really the key stakeholder group of investors that we are focused on in terms of an investment decision-making process. In trying to develop our metrics themselves, we want them to represent the issue or topic reasonably. We want it to be a useful metric for analyzing performance on that issue. We want it to be applicable and comparable across companies. We want it to really describe the issue fully in a completeness sense. We want it to be verifiable. We want there to be the ability to actually ensure that the measurement being taken is accurate. And we want these to be aligned across industry. So we don't want to measure something one way in one industry and a similar thing a completely different way in a different industry. We present those in a standardized format with technical protocols for implementation and detailed research briefs on the development of those metrics with the goal of creating a set of metrics for all industries that are material, decision useful to investors, and cost effective for organizations to produce. As described, these are designed for integration into the mandatory filings for companies that file in the United States, although we also recognize that privately held firms could use the standards to judge their own performance as well. But really, the metrics are and standards are designed and the technical protocols are created with the goal of integrating these into the 10K, 20F, 40F filings into the MD&A section of those reports. So again, I spoke a little bit about this, but to go through again, our basis for materiality starts with a broad spectrum view on this heat map of things that might be of interest to investors. We then take those issues, look for evidence of impact, and do research on whether these are topics that are affecting financial value now. We try to characterize the nature of that. Is that something that's going to affect revenue generation? Is it going to affect the cost and operating structure of a company? Or is it something that could potentially affect asset liability valuation or potentially a company's access or cost of capital. We vet those topics and issues with the market, looking to both issuers and investors for a strong degree of alignment and agreement that those are likely to be material topics. And then we validate and verify what we hear from the market with research into the actual state of disclosure in companies' reporting, and find that a large number, probably about 75% of the topics and issues that we identified as material are already being disclosed in some way, shape, or form in companies' 10Ks. And now that validation process is sort of where we're at now in looking at the standards and metrics, going deeper into the impact of those on performance of the individual standards. And these might be things, here we'll see some examples, like fuel economy and use phase emissions for large engine makers or automakers. These are things that can affect customer demand. There are regulations in place that require certain performance on these things, and failure to meet those targets can definitely affect your potential future revenue. It might be something like accident and safety management in any number of industries where poor performance on that can result in fines, violations, legal action, and potentially even loss of social capital to do business. So these are things that can really impact company performance positively or negatively, and we're going to look into a little more detail now about the renewable resource and alternative energy sector with Henrik.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for joining this morning. So the renewable resources sector is quite diverse, as you can see by the industries involved, everything from biofuels to pulp and paper and forestry management. We do see a few common themes across the sector, however, one of which is the environmental impacts in manufacturing. So most of these industries are relatively energy intensive during the manufacturing of their products. And we also see life cycle impacts is a very important topic across the sector. If you think about things like solar panels, wind turbines, and forest products, and industrial batteries for that matter, they all kind of have significant life cycle impacts if they're not properly managed. So that includes the actual use phase impacts, either energy consumption or emissions during use phase, as well as the end-of-life considerations when these products, which in many cases contain hazardous substances in them, must be properly disposed of. There are also an increasing number of regulations globally that are targeting end-of-life disposal and remediation of some of these products. This slide gives an overview of the disclosure topics in the industry, and what you see highlighted in blue are the topics that fall into these broader themes that cut across each of the industries, environmental impacts, manufacturing, as well as the business model type, the product life cycle type topics. And you can see that the topics are quite diverse across these industries. Supply chain is quite important. We have relatively few topics across the social capital and human capital dimensions, and that's due in part to the fact that some of those social impacts that we have categorized in a business model and innovation type of disclosure topic, where the impacts are occur largely during the product use phase. This is an overview of the state of disclosure for the sector, and you can see that it varies quite a bit by industry, but generally this industry is not performing that well on disclosure in a decision useful manner or including metrics. So we see that, for example, wind energy has pretty poor disclosure. Generally it's either lacking disclosure or it's just kind of a boilerplate, rather vague language. And then pulp and paper product industry, on the other hand, which does have pretty significant environmental impacts, seems to be doing a little bit better in terms of using metrics or company-tailored narratives to describe their sustainability risks and opportunities. This is a closer look at the solar industry state of disclosure. You'll see here that it also varies quite a bit by topic. The strongest disclosure we find is actually in the management of regulatory environment topic. So that it comes as no surprise due to the industry's tremendous reliance on government policy, renewable energy policy, both in the U.S. and abroad. So there we see a lot of companies are reporting either descriptive narratives around the importance of this, of managing government relations and technology, as well as certain metrics on, for example, the price of the units that they're selling, the solar modules. For the other industries, disclosure tends to be fairly weak, either lacking or, again, boilerplate nature for most of these topics across the solar industry, in fact. Now I'm going to look into some specifics on the actual standards that we put forth in our provisional draft. This is looking at 3 different industries: solar energy, fuel cells, and biofuels. And this is looking at business model innovation topics which cut across these 3 industries and a few others. But the key point here is that you'll see that we have a similar topic. So the topics here are generally that these products that are manufactured by these types of companies have fairly significant life cycle impacts. But you'll see here that the actual topics that we've identified for each of these industries is quite different. So we have specific quantitative metrics that address the unique sustainability risks and financial impacts for each of these topics in each industry. So it's very important to note that SASB does take this industry-specific approach that Michael was explaining earlier, and that is quite clear through our metrics too, and then we're drilling down into the key value drivers for every industry. This is a closer look at some of the feedback that we received during our standards development process for the biofuels industry. Topic is life cycle emissions balance, which looks at the carbon intensity of the fuels that these biofuels companies are manufacturing. And we find that during the industry working group phase of our standards development, about 84% of the participants agreed on the likely materiality of this life cycle emissions balance topic. And 94% of participants supported the metric that we had, the quantitative metric that measured the life cycle emissions of the biofuels that were produced, either an ethanol or a biodiesel fuel. And this issue was ranked 2nd out of 7 issues in by the participants as well. And on the right-hand column, you'll see some of the financial impacts that we identified for this topic, including revenue growth, CapEx, operating expenditures, and even reputational impacts for some of these companies that are relying on producing low-carbon fuels that their customers are really seeking to purchase those. So this feedback was a critical part of our process in ensuring that the topics we identified were material, and the metrics we'd also identified were likely to be a fair and accurate representation of performance on each of these topics. Here's another look at disclosure. So SASB, what we're trying to do is improve the quality of disclosure for each of these sustainability topics. And what you'll see on the left-hand column here is the boilerplate type language that we typically see across all industries, and especially in the renewables sector. So companies are talking about these topics in many cases, but they're doing it in very vague, generic language, which actually doesn't give investors any idea as to how they're performing or what the risks actually are. And on the right-hand side, you'll see this is an actual disclosure from a solar company on this product lifecycle impact topic. So they are specifically reporting the share of their products that can be recycled or reused into new products. And that's something that SASB has identified with the help of stakeholder input as something that's likely to drive shareholder value in the future because of the potential for hazardous substances in these PV modules, as well as the cost benefits that companies can achieve by recycling components and materials into their manufacturing phase. I'm now going to talk a little bit about our process for change for a couple industries. So for each industry in the sector, we have put forth a limited number of proposals for updates to the standard, one of which is in biofuels under the management of the legal regulatory environment. We're hoping to clarify the language around subsidies for this industry. Because subsidies are such a key value driver for biofuels, we want to make sure that companies are reporting the direct financial subsidies that they're receiving through government support in the US or EU, because that is an extremely important driver. Renewable fuel standards have been a key driver of growth in this industry over the past 10 to 15 years. But we want to make sure that companies are reporting direct subsidies and not just a kind of general support, because in some cases you can't quantify support, and it's very difficult to produce meaningful and comparable disclosure when it is not direct financial disclosure. Another example of some of the updates we're looking to make are in pulp and paper products under air quality. This is a highly technical update, but we're hoping to limit the scope of our emissions metric to SO2 emissions and particulate matter. So it's this change was based on a number of public comments that we received, and again, the idea here is to improve the comparability and relevance and cost effectiveness of this disclosure, because several companies told us that it simply is too difficult to measure different types of emissions. So they really want us to hone in on the largest share of emissions, the most easy and cost effective to measure. But this disclosure will still get at the heart of the issue and still allow an investor looking at this disclosure to really make an informed decision on emissions performance. Now I'm going to turn it back to Michael to discuss some of the next steps in SASB's process.
Thanks, Henrik. And just as another reminder, do get any questions you have in. We'll be taking those in just a couple minutes. So right now, Henrik and the team of sector analysts here at SASB are engaged in a process of deep consultation with issuers, with investors, with other experts in the market to get feedback on the standards themselves. So I'd also encourage any of you who want to participate in that process to be engaged, to provide feedback, and so that we can ensure that the standards are fit for purpose and ready to go when we codify them Q3 of next year. So the deep consultation process I mentioned will proceed roughly through Q1 of 2017, after which we will take the feedback we've received through that process and amalgamate it into our published proposed changes, which we will post for public comment in Q2 of next year. Alongside that work, we will be seating our Standards Council, which will be overseeing the development and codification process, and that group will ultimately have responsibility for the standards themselves. That group will be appointed by the SASB board, which will also contain within it an oversight committee to respond to any issues that arise around the process under which the standards were developed and any concerns about that. So summarizing what I just said, we're in this process of deep consultation. We'll move forward with our proposed changes, put those up for public comment, and then take all the feedback we've received through both the consultation and public comment period, propose any changes to the current provisional standards to publish the formal SASB standards in Q3 of next year. We recently announced our investor advisory group. As you can see, it contains quite a number of leading institutional investors and asset owners. This group is there to help us understand what investors are looking for from the standards so that they can make informed decisions around these issues. And we also have a set of advisory partners who can help companies understand the standards better and how to implement them going forward. SASB has also published quite a few resources available for download or other use. We have our FSA certificate program. We just graduated the first set of recipients of that who passed the level 2 exam. We have our materiality map on our website that lets anyone understand which issues and topics are relevant in which industry and look at the metrics associated with that. We have various technical bulletins, and our recently launched SASB Navigator that lets users really dig into the standards and metrics themselves, the research behind them, and all of the details there. We also have a set of bulletins and resources for investors, an engagement guide, as well as our implementation guide for issuers to understand how to use the standards in their reporting. With that, I'm going to open it up for questions. Let me just give it one moment and see what we've got, and we'll get to those in 1 second. All right, so first question, Henrik, can solar and wind be competitive without subsidies?
That's a good question. I think probably they're definitely moving that direction. You know, the government support has been tremendous in driving growth, probably for the past 20 years at least in those two industries. But it looks like at least recently, you know, I think cost parity has been achieved, definitely in wind and likely in solar now. So I'd say yes, definitely moving in the right direction. But you know, it's not to say that subsidies are not still an important driver.
And sort of related to that, a parallel question, do you anticipate regulatory shifts to impact industries in the renewable sector, or is that cost competitiveness going to kind of keep the ball rolling?
Yeah, so about a year ago, we did have in the U.S. the extension of the investment tax credit for wind and solar. So that was, you know, seen as a very important driver for the industry. Moving forward, that program will be phased out as of 2022, according to the current law. But with the new administration, it's unclear what will happen with that type of support. But yeah, you know, going back to what I said earlier, it's likely that cost parity, you know, is going to be the driver moving forward more than government support. So I think things are looking quite good.
Great. Here's an interesting one. So why is forestry and pulp and paper included in the renewables instead of industrials?
Good question. So from SASB's point of view, these two industries are utilizing a renewable resource, forests and forest products, to drive value. And so we look at it, you know, if a forest is sustainably managed, theoretically, you know, a forestry company and in turn the pulp and paper producers can you know, keep producing product indefinitely and not have a detrimental impact on the environment. And so we categorize it under that for that reason. But what we did during our standards development process was decide to split forestry from pulp and paper. Initially, we had them grouped into one industry, but stakeholders told us that it was better to split them apart based on the kind of current integration of companies in North America and Europe. But they're still, you know, relying on and utilizing a renewable resource as the main driver of value creation.
Great. And I've got one more. How do new battery storage technologies get accounted for in the standards?
That's a good question. I'd say probably most likely through our discussion analysis metrics. We have a few of those in the fuel cells and industrial battery standard that really try to get at how companies are approaching utilizing the latest technologies and technological development, you know, to drive value. So we really also want to not only focus on risk, but of course opportunities for these industries and how they can help their customers you know, utilize renewable energy or drive energy efficiency in their own operations and products. So I'd say, yeah, most likely showing up in the discussion analysis metrics. So we definitely want to capture that that important cutting edge growth.
Great. That was our last question. We want to thank everyone for attending, and this will be recorded and available later for future listening. Look ahead to our final webinar coming up soon, and thanks for your participation.